The 8th Legion. The Night Lords. Primarch Konrad Curze. Allegiance, traitor. Chaos affiliation, none. Homeworld, none. Formerly Nostramo. Current commander, none. Specialization, infiltration and psychological warfare. Battle cry, Ave Dominus Nox. Hail the Lord of Night. Perhaps there truly is something to be said for fate and legacy, for even in its earliest inception, the 8th Legion, before it was even called the Night Lord's Legion, was born and built in a world of darkness and sin. The first recruits of the 8th Legion were children born in a dark prison of terror to prisoners, murderers, dissidents, and the most undesirable of human society. They made excellent recruits, for they had no love for their families, no knowledge of the outside world, and no real attachments to cling to. But what they did have was a strong survivor's instinct. They were noted as pale, night-born children, and when turned into Astartes, they were made fear manifest. Their first engagement was against the Saragorn Enclave during the Unification Wars. The Enclave had, at one point, conducted illegal side-reading experiments, but had promised to cease this practice when they surrendered to the Emperor. However, the Emperor learned they had not stopped and continued their illegal practices. To not only destroy them, but make an example of them, the 8th Legion was sent to destroy and leave them for dead, and they did so mercilessly. This use of the 8th Legion as not just warriors, but as a force to make examples of their enemies, would be a standard practice for the 8th. Despite their questionable recruitment, the 8th were without flaw or question of loyalty. However, with the discovery of Nostromo, a true creature of the night would be discovered, a figure of darkness who would change the Legion forever. The creature that would become Konrad Curze was, at first, a small boy lost on the world of Nostromo. Abandoned there thanks to Chaos's machinations, the child had found himself on a world that was as close to hell as it was possible to be in a society. The world was rich with minerals and thus was a great mining outcrop, but poverty was rampant, suicide more common a cause of death than nature or old age, and the rich and powerful were abusive to the underclass and the weak. Crime was so common that the cities were more dangerous to live in than the wilds. It was truly a concrete jungle where only the strong or wealthy could survive. Depression, isolation, and despair were common and accepted. It was into this world of darkness that the boy lived and survived. Much like his older brother Lionel Johnson, the boy with no name yet was not raised by a family, but was instead forced to fend for himself and live off of his own cleverness and wit. The child was plagued by constant visions and nightmares of future horrors and events that made sleeping a difficulty. These nightmares would plague him all his life. The boy had a strong sense of justice, and as he witnessed the evils of Nostramo, he grew to resent it, so he took action. As a vigilante, he attacked those who he saw doing evil and wrong. He would kill petty thieves first, murderers, rapists, criminals, but eventually his exploits grew more bold and audacious. The bodies of corrupt officials were found strung up from walls, body parts blocked sewer grates, mangled and mutilated corpses were left in criminal headquarters, so destroyed that they weren't even recognizable. Screams of gangsters and villains could be heard in the night. Fear of this dark warrior led to a dramatic change on Nostromo. Crime activity dropped to near zero. Parents would tell their children to stop misbehaving, or the Night Haunter would get them. This name, Night Haunter, latched onto the young man well, and soon it was what all of Nostromo called him. The Night Haunter would eventually reveal himself to the lords of Nostromo, and he was appointed its ruling figure, a king of sorts. And to the surprise of many, the Night Haunter was a wise and even fair ruler, showing benevolent and compassionate wisdom in making laws and regulations to benefit the people. However, when he heard of evil or injustice being done, the Night Haunter would personally go out to deal with it in the way he was known for, and make a brutal and bloody example of the villain. This led to many fearing and admiring the Night Haunter and all that he stood for. But the Lord of Night, not too long into his time as ruler, would begin having new visions and nightmares of a glorious light appearing on his world, and a being so glorious and powerful, he would bring down doom to the world of perpetual darkness, and to him as well, for the Emperor had arrived on Nostromo. Curze was so overwhelmed by the glory of the Emperor that upon seeing him, he had sudden visions of not only the great deeds that would be done through him, but also deeds done against him. He saw the deaths of each of his brother primarchs, in a fleeting vision of all things coming to ruin. He was terrified, but also unable to deny the magnificence of the Emperor of Man. He was given his legion and dubbed them the Night Lords. Along with this, Curze would recruit warriors from his own homeworld to join his new legion, thus bolstering the Night Lords further. Curze was adamant that the finest of the noble warriors of Nostromo would join his legion. Only the finest warriors be allowed in the tithe. The Night Lords would take their Gene Father's methods of war to heart. Curze instilled in his sons an understanding of psychological warfare and terrorist tactics. They specialized in infiltration, subterfuge, and the breaking of minds. Theirs was to terrify and demoralize the enemy forces. Their methods were brutal, harsh, and in some cases barbaric. Many loyalist legions, primarchs, and forces did not understand why Curze and the Night Lords fought in this way, causing atrocities and inhumane acts all to send messages of terror. But in truth, it is believed the Emperor intended this. The Night Lords were, after all, taken from the children of prisoners on Terra initially, and already had a more undisciplined and ferocious nature, being used not unlike the Space Wolves to make examples of their foes. So for this reason, the Night Lords were often sent to worlds that had been brought into submission, but were being overly uncooperative, or who threatened open rebellion. The Night Lords could quickly and effectively terrify and demoralize the population into compliance. Curze also encouraged the adoption of death imagery, such as skulls, bat wings, flayed skin, and flesh, and any other icons or decorations that would instill fear. The Night Lords developed such a reputation that soon worlds began obeying purely out of knowledge that the Night Lords might be sent to subjugate them. This all mirrored Curze's own actions on Nostramo, and it was highly effective. However, despite their successes, gradual issues began to develop for the Night Lords. The first, but more subtle issue, was in the reinforcements coming from Nostromo. As the wars wore on, reinforcements from Nostromo were required, but in the absence of the Night Haunter, Nostromo was gradually falling back into its criminal and villainous ways, meaning that the new recruits were often criminals, murderers, psychopaths, gangsters, and rapists, all of whom possessed little loyalty for the Imperium, but instead a twisted desire to impose their own reckless and destructive instincts on others without fear of repercussions. Respect and admiration for the brutality of the Night Haunter made them loyal to him, at least, so there was no obvious sign of a problem yet. But further, the ways of the Night Lords were not appreciated by many, and Curze, along with his legion, were often brought into conflict with his own allies. This disunity among the Primarchs and the legions was not unique to Curze and his Night Lords, but it would cause a great deal of dissension for Curze and his followers. During a joint campaign with the Imperial Fists and the Emperor's children, Curze began suddenly having violent visions of the future that terrified him, and for the first time, he tried to confide in his brothers about his fears. He told Fulgrim and Dorn of his concerns for the future, how he had seen visions of a future civil war where all the Primarchs battled each other, where the Emperor ordered the deaths of not only himself, but Horus and others, and how the dreams of the Imperium would fail. Fulgrim was aghast at this, and Dorn went into a fury. He chastised and belittled Curze, calling him insubordinate and foolish. The conversation turned physical, and Curze lashed out at Dorn, beating him bloody and killing a few Imperial Fists and Emperor's children who tried to stop him. When Curze regained his composure and his senses, he realized that he had killed innocents and lost his temper. He allowed himself to be arrested, for he still had his sense of justice. He had killed innocent people, lost his temper, and must now face punishment. However, while waiting in his prison cell, he received news that, in his absence, Nostramo had slipped back into its villainous ways. Furious, Curze escaped his holdings and left with his legion to Nostromo, where he sealed the planet's fate for good, firing on the planet's weaknesses and destroying it entirely. The Night Lords had gone rogue, and the Imperium was stunned. As for Curze, while he still retained his sense of justice, a new truth had become known to him. He had become a true fatalist. He had long envisioned the destruction of Nostromo, and he'd worked to try to prevent that end, worked to turn the planet around. But seeing that it so easily fell back into chaos without him, it seemed fate was unavoidable. So, if it was fate that he wage war against the Imperium, and fate that he join up with Horus, then he would not fight it, and he would bend to its will. When the Horus heresy began, the Night Lords, along with the Iron Warriors and the Alpha Legion, turned against the Loyalists and caused massive and irreparable harm to the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, and the Iron Hands legions. After this, the Night Lords, rather than run to the aid of Horus to join with his forces, would proceed to launch a series of unfocused and even unnecessary genocide campaigns against scattered Imperial worlds, likely to shut down any Imperial support from that sector. But they would, in doing so, draw the attention of an Alpha Predator. The Lion had found them, and the Dark Angels would descend upon the Night Lords in the Thramas Crusade. The Night Lords had 3 goals to complete in the Thramas system. First was to cause genocidal destruction to Imperial worlds and cripple the eastern sections of the galaxy. Second was to act as a distraction to draw the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson away from Terra so they couldn't oppose Horus. The third was to cut off supply routes to Terra that Rogel Dorn desperately needed. And at first, the Night Lords were met with great success, but when the Dark Angels at last arrived, the victories dried up, and the 8th Legion quickly realized they were outmatched and outgunned by the Emperor's Angels of Death. Eventually, Konrad Curze and Lionel Johnson agreed to a meeting to discuss their predicament. At first, the conversation was peaceful. The two seemed amiable, even admitting that they had many things in common, as both primarchs had been raised on worlds without families and were forced to survive by their wits and their wiles alone. Until Konrad began dropping hints that Caliban was currently falling away, which the Lion didn't know about, and even slandered the Lion's honor and bravery. Lion, furious at being slighted, struck Curze, and the two began to grapple. Curze managed to grab the Lion's throat to strangle him, but was stabbed by Corswain of the Dark Angels. The two Primarchs were separated by their honor guard, and this was not intended to end in violence, so they left each other. The summit had failed. The war would resume. This war on Thramas would continue in a constant back and forth of Night Lords defending and holding ground against Dark Angels' ferocity, until at last on Sheol 9, a final and decisive battle would end the conflict. The Dark Angels would launch an all-out attack against the Night Lords. Though the Night Lords didn't give up ground, they lost 25% of their whole legion in the defense, and Curze, who finally had a chance to duel Lionel Johnson in open combat, was woe to realize the Lord of the First was his superior. Lion dealt Curze such a definitive blow and injury, it left him comatose and too injured to go on. Sevatar, Curze's first captain, had to take command, temporarily, in order the Night Lords to scatter to evade total destruction. But in the end, he was captured by the Dark Angels, leaving the Night Lords ultimately leaderless. And as for Curze himself, though not captured, was confined to the Invincible Reason, the flagship of the Dark Angels, where he would stay hidden and cause his own brand of panic and disorder. With Sevatar and the Night Haunter gone, leadership finally fell to Grendor Skyvok after a fierce power struggle, who declared that he would lead the Night Lords to aid Horus on Terra. From here, the Night Lords do little of great regard during the Horus Heresy. During the Siege of Terra, Skyvok dueled Raldaron, the first captain of the Blood Angels, and was easily bested, leaving the Night Lords again leaderless. As for Curze, He escaped onto the planet Macragge, home of the Ultramarines, when Lion united with Guilliman and Sanguinius to build Imperium Secundus. Eventually, Lion hunted him down and again beat him into submission. Lion wanted to execute him, but was stopped by Sanguinius, who wanted to prove a point to his fatalistic brother. Like Curze, Sanguinius too had the gift of future sight, but he is not a fatalist and believes destinies can be changed. In their time together, Sanguinius tried to prove this to Curze, who was absolutely terrified at the thought of it. This was an anathema to Curze. You must understand it from his perspective. Curze was met with visions of death and damnation for himself and Nostromo. He worked so hard to change the outcome of it, only for Nostromo to fall back into corruption, so he destroyed it. Thus he brought about the very fate he foresaw. If fate can be altered, as Sanguinius says, then could Nostramo have been spared? Could his visions of his own death, of the emperors, of the Imperium, all be ended? All he'd done during the heresy, he thought he had done as a slave to fate and to his wretched dreams, but if they could be beaten and challenged, had he done all his evil deeds for nothing? Had he truly been so weak that he had just accepted a fate he could have changed? This terrified Curze, and even when he was ejected into deep space by Sanguinius, Guilliman, and Lion, even when he was rediscovered by his desperate legion, he was still haunted by this possibility. The Night Lords would return to the eastern fringes of the galaxy to continue their raids of fear and devastation. Curze himself would remain in the fortress of Sagalusa, where he would sit and wait for the final vision he had for himself. The Night Lords were one of the few legions to maintain a large number of forces of Marines, and the High Lords were desperate to strike a blow against them. Their choice? To assassinate Konrad Curze. A Calidus assassin named Shen snuck into the Sagalusa fortress, found Curze alone, and assassinated him. Strangely enough, Curze knew this was coming and allowed it to happen. He even told Shen, quote, "Death is nothing compared to vindication." You see, Curze refused to accept that his visions could be changed and that fate could be defied. Since he foresaw his death at the hands of this assassin, rather than resist it and prove his actions as wicked and immoral, he would prefer vindication. That fate cannot be defied, and that destiny is what it is meant to be. And so dies the Night Haunter, and so rises a new era for the Night Lord's Legion. Though they had been given orders to let Shen live by Curze, the Night Lords had captured and tortured her to death for her hand in killing their primarch. Without a firm leader, the Night Lords were not prepared when the Ultramarines arrived at Sagalusa. The battle was hopeless, and thus the Legion was forced to fracture again and flee in different directions. Now the Legion claims to make its base in the Eye of Terror, but they have no true leader any longer, operating as stranded and scattered remnants of their former strength. However, this suits many of them fine. The Night Lords would continue their long and merciless campaign against the galaxy, spreading their plague of fear and terror wherever they go. With the recent opening of the Great Rift, the time of midnight has truly begun. The Night Lords now have even further mobility and desire to strike at Imperial worlds, using the fear and paranoia created by the Great Rift to enhance and further their own divisions and vicious goals, whatever they may be. Indeed, the Legion seems to have no overarching goals beyond spreading pandemonium, chaos, and fear. Some may fight in the name of their primarch, bringing dark justice to a galaxy that's long forgotten it. Others just enjoy their hedonistic and sadistic lifestyle and enjoy causing death and pain. Yet others just seek purpose in a galaxy where they seem to not have any meaning. What is the case for the Night Lords is that where shadows linger and darkness reigns, there will be lords who rule it. And all hail the Lords of Night. The Night Lords Legion, from its very beginning, was naturally opposed to order, structure, and unification. Many coming from a world like Nostromo, where crime and wickedness was commonplace, most only sought personal and selfish ends, their only unifying force being the Night Haunter himself. During the days of the Great Crusade, the Legion did display a certain cohesion and unity, allowing them to break even the most well-fortified and defiant worlds. They specialized in sabotage and terror tactics, but beyond this, they excelled at ingraining terror in their prey so as to discourage further dissension. But after the death of Curze, any form of unity and cohesion was all but gone from the Legion. They now operate as individual and different bands of pirates, renegades, and terrorists. The only thing they have in common is the desire to inspire fear in others, and will go to any lengths to instill fright and doom in a populace they engage with. Interestingly enough, the Night Lords, despite being traitors, tend not to support the Chaos Gods, and will shun the worship of them. Now that's not to say none worship Chaos. There are some who do lean into the powers of the Warp, but these are a rarity. After all, just because the Night Lords hold no loyalty to humanity does not mean they will hold unity to humanity's enemies. The Night Lords are fear and calamity made manifest. They hold no allegiance to any power but their own interest, which makes them as unpredictable as they are deadly. The Night Lords decorate their armor in skulls, blood, flayed flesh, and fangs, all with the intent of making themselves seem more horrifying. While some have compared the Night Lords to the Raven Guard, as both are masters of stealth and subterfuge, there are key differences, the largest of which being that the Night Lords want their presence known. Night Lords reveal their presence very early by their deeds, but simply do not allow themselves to be found, stopped, or engaged until they want to be. They are known to broadcast screams across planetary Vox channels, leave flayed and mutilated bodies hanging from public buildings, and torture individuals to near madness, all for the purposes of frightening their foes. Night Lords are also considered cowardly by many other marine elements, as they would prefer not to engage in direct fights with their opposition. As Raldoron said when he dueled Skyvark on Terra, "That's the problem with your Legion, Night Lord. You're quick with your torturous knives, but so few of your actually worthy warriors." Now, it's not that they can't fight in standard battle, but they prefer not to, instead trusting in underhanded and tactical maneuvers to break the spirit of their foes. They do not wage war for the thrill of it, and will only engage in a straight-up fight if they know they can win, and win easily. Many Night Lords, when presented with a threat that is not yet broken or afraid, will retreat until they can wound the enemy enough to reinstate that fear they love to sow. A few notable Night Lords to keep in mind are Krieg Akribus the Axemaster, the current leader of the largest Night Lords warband in the galaxy. He believes himself the true heir of Curze, and believes that the true aim of the Night Haunter was fear for the sake of fear. He does not view the spread of fear and terror as a means to an end, but as the end itself, and causes terrorism simply for the thrill of it. He is a demon prince of chaos, and is imbued with chaotic powers. Intriguingly, he seems to keep distance from other elements of his legion, seeming to know that not all approve his allegiance to the dark gods. Then there's Jago Sevatarian. Originally the first captain of the Night Lords and the closest confidant of Konrad Curze, despite his own admission to being a sadist and psychopath, Sevatarian seemed to realize that the Night Lords didn't need to go down the path they did, and according to some accounts, seemed to remember his oath of dark justice. Indeed, there's a story that while attached to the Dark Angel's ship after his capture, he actually participated in rescuing a young girl from abuse and torture. However, he is believed to be dead, and with him gone, there has been no true unifying leader of the Night Lords since. And then there's Zos Sahal, also known as the Talent Master. It was believed that Curze intended Zos Sahal to succeed him as leader of the Night Lords, but none respected this decision, and since he's been forced to remain on the run from his own legion, as many seek to steal from him the last relic of their primarch, the Corona Nox. The Night Lords are specialists in infiltration and assassination. During the Great Crusade, and even the Post-heresy, there were few legions that were capable of getting into the heart of an enemy stronghold like the 8th. Once inside, they would assassinate leaders, torture dissidents, and allow their screams to be heard by the populace. They are still experts at this today. And of their many traits, their self-reliance is commendable. The Night Lords no longer function as a cohesive legion, but they don't need to in order to be effective. Each Night Lord is a master unto himself, and most do not require a command structure or leader to give them orders, easily able to fight for themselves and handle things in their own way. Having battle brothers is convenient, but not often necessary. A separated Night Lord is no weaker than he was when he was attached to his legion. The Night Lords have no higher motivations or goals beyond their spread of fear and terror, meaning they have nothing of higher purpose or value to fight for or to achieve. As a result, the Night Lords don't seem to have any goals, interests, or end they wish to see achieved or obtained, making them unfortunately bland to follow or root for. And further, the Legion is fractured and shows no sign of resuming its former strength and size. They operate as differing and uncoordinated warbands that serve their own interests and goals. This means they can raid and attack worlds and outposts effectively enough, but have no power to fight a larger force or hold down a defensive perimeter of their own if they need it against much more powerful enemies. Further, they are more effective when the enemy's will is broken and they are plagued by terror. Straightforward combat is simply not their way. The Night Lords are kind of annoying to me, but not because of them or their lore. I mean, it's fine, but rather because of their fans. It's odd, but try to follow me on this one. Konrad Curze, the primarch, is a very tragic and sympathetic individual. His story is one perfectly suited for the grimdark aspect of Warhammer, and I can see why a lot of people consider him their favorite. There is a great character there. But for some reason, his fans seem to think that this tragic beauty extends to his Legion when it really doesn't. With maybe the exception of Sevatar, but that's a different story. The classic statement I hear is, the Night Lords are the ultimate rebels who don't fight for anyone, not the false Imperium and its immoral ways, or the corrupt Chaos Gods. They just do what they want, and that's awesome. Yeah, until you realize that fighting for no one and nothing of value is incredibly boring. They didn't rebel against the Imperium because they disagreed with the Imperium and its immoral nature. And they don't defy chaos because they recognize it as evil. They don't serve anyone because they just like doing things their own way. And what way is that? Sadistic, psychotic, and twisted torture and murder. Indeed, what rebels? Curze used fear as a means to bring justice. He was a Batman-like character, a twisted mirror of what Vlad the Impaler was meant to be, a man who used dark and horrifying methods to bring peace and justice. He used fear and destruction as a means to an end. Dark, complex, fascinating. But his Legion? A pack of cowards who strike from the shadows to terrify their prey, but do not do it for any higher purpose than personal thrill and enjoyment. They stand for, frankly, nothing, and therefore their actions are baseless and petty. People who think that they are somehow dark, noble warriors who spread dark justice, no, you're thinking of Curze and Sevataria, not the current Legion. The current Legion? Well, I think Raldoron said it best when Scrivok was begging for help from his Legion on Terra. The Masters of Fear. You're cowards, as all cruel men